Welcome back to Leveraging Leadership, where we unpack the art of business leadership. I'm your host, Emily Sander, Chief of Staff turned Executive Leadership Coach. This show is all about finding your points of greatest influence and leveraging them to better serve those around you. Our guest today is Melissa Schmidiger, and she is going to talk to us about how the Chief of Staff role can be a strategic role in your career. And if you partner with the right principal and with the right company, it can be this catalyst that opens up a whole bunch of different roles that you can progress in your career because she has experienced that herself. So Melissa, welcome to the show.
Thanks very much, Emily. Glad to be here.
So to start out, can you take us back to what you were doing right before you became acting chief of staff?
So I was working in McKinsey Company for about for about 3 years. And after I decided that this was not for me, I was working in the Philippines, actually. I had set up, uh, I was one of the few that were recruited to set up the Southeast Asia office. And I was based in the Philippines. And I had worked there for about 3 years. And then I thought, maybe I should try to do something differently. And I took a 1 year sabbatical. And I was doing consulting for myself. And I worked with groups like World Wildlife Fund Philippines. And then I got a call from the CEO of that company, Ayala Land. And he had been my managing director in McKinsey. And he said, we have quite a few openings in Ayala Land. Would you like to interview? And I thought, okay, why not? I had missed working in corporate. And I found myself in as a head of marketing for the deputy head of marketing for commercial centers. I was also asked to take on a concurrent role for customer knowledge, which was for the entire company. So had basically insights role. And then 7 months into that role, I was asked to become chief of staff.
And what precipitated that move?
He had become the CEO of Ayala Land, taking on that role after 25 years of another CEO. So he was the first CEO after a long-standing CEO. So he had brought in a breath of fresh air, but he was a very different kind of CEO. So a different management style. And therefore, the people who were working with him found his style to be very foreign and needed some translation for what he required. And I think I was probably one of the few people who had ever worked for him. And they asked me to come translate what he meant because he had, coming from McKinsey, I'm sure he brought on some jargon and he had different expectations. And so having worked with him for 3 years before, I knew what he meant. I knew how he spoke, and I could crystallize his ideas into execution. And that's what I did.
Okay. So, and just to be clear, it wasn't like a language barrier. It was, you're talking in this world and from this perspective, and it's not resonating or not landing or being understood
Yeah,
by his team at the time.
definitely not a language barrier. I mean, we all spoke in the same language. But I think what's very different is it's not just about consultant speak. It's about basically dropping in from one industry into another, right? And
Yeah.
also, he had never worked in real estate development, and neither had I. But I had worked before in operations, so I knew what operations speak looked like, and I knew what needed to get how to translate what needed to be done. And
Yeah.
he had come from a world where you spoke in terms of ideas and you communicated in terms of pictures and charts. And in a world of ideas to a world of action, there's a big, big world of difference in between. So you need somebody to so he liked to talk his ideas out and wanted to get people to be on board and communicate what they thought. They wanted direction. So that's a very big gap in between. So
That
my
is a
job,
big yeah.
yeah, so my job was really to make sure that, they understood each other. Um,
And how did you do that? Is there an example of something where it's like, "All right, is it literally what he meant to say or what he means by that is," or what was there some other method that you did?
yeah, I would literally I would be in the same room, and I would say, nobody needs to take notes anymore. Please don't take notes. Just listen to what he says. I will summarize before the end of the meeting, and I will say, this is the one chart that needs to be had by everybody by the end of the
Mm,
meeting. Just listen and participate. I'll take notes. And this is the summary. And I would nail it every time because he would process while speaking. And if
mm.
everybody was busy taking notes, they wouldn't be able to like contribute to the ideas. And just by telling people that he wanted you to participate with the idea generation instead of taking notes, that contributed to more people understanding what needed to be done, right? So
So
that was value add just by that, right?
So he was a verbal processor and he liked to talk out ideas, and
Hmm.
everyone was sitting there with like their notepads thinking, okay, this is directives. These are directives that I
Hmm.
have to go do. And so making that switch of he wants to engage in a group discussion and he's actually asking for your feedback and
Input.
input. And then of course, sometime toward the end of the process, they'll will be all right, here are next steps, but that that happens later, it sounds like.
Yeah. And therefore, my value add is saying these are the next steps. And you need to
Yeah.
be present when input is required, right? And so
Yeah.
then they're able to like put their hand up for and provide input because their knowledge was their value add was to provide input because they've been in the business for 25 years. And all he's doing is asking the questions because someone had to ask the questions. And
Mm.
he's opening it up for everybody's larger thinking, which is great. And that's when real great ideas started. And then people got on board and really, beautiful plans happened together. And the collective wisdom really happened. So that was really important. The second thing was ensuring that everybody's needs were cataloged on a day's agenda. So if I saw meetings were happening that next day, I would make sure that I understood what was specifically on the agenda
Yeah.
that before that meeting, right? So that
Yeah.
I could prepare whoever was going to be in the meeting for potential questions. So every meeting was properly prepared for.
And just out of curiosity, it sounded like you worked with the team members on understanding the CEO's approach and point of view. Did you have discussions or, executive coaching with the CEO on, hey, here's how people are hearing you. So I'm going to help translate, but here are some things you can do to make yourself, better understood.
I would feed back to him what as well. This is where at the end of the day, this is where you also need to be more clear. Right? At the end of the day, we'd have a debrief at at the end of every day. It's like, okay, this is where things kind of got a little bit murky. This is where we need to be clear. This is the meeting that should happen after. These are the emails that need to be written to clarify. So we had this kind of debrief as well. So
Okay,
it
gotcha.
was both the translation bit was quite heavy lifting.
Yeah, two-way street and pretty
Yeah.
consistent, it sounds like. But
Yeah.
all right, so you certainly learned the translator role, and that was a
Hmm.
big aspect you took away
Hmm.
from your time as chief of staff. What other skills or traits or things that you really learned hands-on in that role that that worked in your favor to catapult you to different things?
I think for me, there were two other things that were important, right? Because by doing that, I got a really good lay of the land of what what happened at the board level because I was in all the board meetings, I helped with all the board prep, so I got a very good sense of what board governance looked like because we also drove it from our seat, right? And the third bit was also I was also asked what skills did I want to learn because with understanding that the chief of staff role is not a permanent role. This is just a part of my career, but not my end goal. So, given that I saw how the workings of the chief of the president, the chief of staff, I had inner workings. Um, if I had a choice of what I could learn, what role would I want to learn? And I said, well,
Mm,
I know marketing, I know design, but what I don't know is, and where I would like to get a bit stronger is I'd like to, have I'd like to get some knowledge on deal making and finance. And could I get some exposure to that? And so I did, right? So there was a big JV being crafted. So I got on the team, and I think that's very rare that you can get
mm.
exposure to such you know incredible projects, right? That strengthen your portfolio. At the same time, there were projects that I love to do. So there was a brand architecture project that I was driving because I like branding, right? So I was on top of the brand architecture project for the whole firm, right? Together with the branding experts. But that was something that I love to do. That was my passion. But it's not just about feeding what you're good at. You also need to be testing the things that you're not so good at with people who can strengthen you. And that's why I asked for this stuff on finance. So I was using my time at chief of staff to also, well, fill my portfolio.
Yeah, so it sounds like you were a translator, you were involved in strategic decisions and board governance. You certainly could read rooms and put pieces together, and then you
Mhm,
you strategically and intentionally said, "All right, here are some things that I'm good at and I can contribute right now, but here are some things that I maybe don't know so much about, but I would like to learn more." And your boss gave you the opportunity to go into those types of roles, which just filled out your skill set. So I think that's fantastic. And I think that is one of the great things about the chief of staff role is, not every principal is going to have that opportunity for their chiefs of staff, but some are, and
mhm,
those opportunities are fantastic. You're learning, you're contributing, and
mhm.
I think that that speaks to the trust that he had in you, and also him as a leader.
Absolutely. I think, he's absolutely one of my favorite bosses, just because he's always had his eye out for how am I supposed to develop. I mean, Jim Ayala has always been this kind of boss who really thinks about who you are as a person, how can you grow, and what direction of travel do you need to go to get there. So I think that's very special. You don't normally get somebody who's quite unselfish in helping somebody grow. And this is one of those roles, like it could have gone the other way. It could have become
Right.
a role where you're just managing a calendar,
Yeah.
and it certainly wasn't.
No, certainly not. So, where did this role take you? What happened after your chief of staff role?
So after the chief of staff role, the reason I left the chief of staff role, and that's shocking because of all the things I got to do. Um, part of it was during my tenure there, we were also reorganizing. Um, there was also reorganizations happening in the company. One of which was in the residential business group. It was a massive reshuffle, and the new head of residential business, and this included um, three different brands of ultra high luxury, um, economic, and mid segment. He asked me to head up marketing for the ultra high luxury. So it then became a CMO role. So I was like,
Mm,
oh, nice. This is what I love to do. Right. So that became a head of marketing role. And it became my first step into something, uh, leading a team of six or seven. And that was quite a nice jump from chief of staff. And after that, I was also given increasing responsibility into head of business. So this is where I say, like, chief of staff can really catapult you into different
Mhm.
things. Because after that, I got increasing responsibilities in Ayala Land, and soon after, not soon after, but I spent quite a good number of years in Ayala, and then after that, I found myself in Singapore, where I was also uh, I was a regional head for insights, and then now I'm in Switzerland, and I'm a global head. I was a global head of insights, and I'm now the global head of employer brand. So it's really taken me, and with it's taken me further, right? Because I don't think if I did not have that pivotal role in chief of staff, where I learned my stakeholder management skills, where I learned to read a room, and where I learned all these necessary skills of like fi- finance and the brand architecture and working across the company, up and down, managing. I don't think I would have come quite this far.
And just out of curiosity, so you went from chief of staff
Hmm.
to the CMO role,
Hmm.
and if you hadn't been chief of staff, would you have been able to work your way up to CMO, or would that have been impossible in the situation you were in?
I don't think it would have happened quite as fast. I think it would probably, I think
Okay.
I was recruited for a deputy head of the malls, and then I might have had to stay there for a longer time and then waited for that role to vacate, and then I maybe to move to residential. It'd probably taken years, but this is like a catapult into this very prime role. So I was
So it
catapulted.
accelerated it.
Yeah, it was an accelerant.
Yeah. Okay.
Mm.
Okay, interesting. And then so, um, I know you're in Switzerland and you've led large teams. Can you talk a little bit about the roles you've had since? You mentioned kind of the trajectory and
Yeah.
listing those out, but what uh, types of things were you doing in those roles?
So in Singapore, I led a team of insight professionals, and we covered um, Australia, Singapore, Indonesia, and the Philippines. And we grew consumer insight panels from, like, I think we started off with 500 people in one insight panel. Insight panel is basically, you ask people to answer questions, and we were developing apps based on their answers. And by the
Oh,
time I left, we had 40,000 people on them, and we were
wow.
selling, and we were also merging the answers together with location data, and we were able to, like, it was quite cool, and we were building award-winning apps based on the information we were getting. We would get answers back within a day. So it was very, very cool. Uh,
Wow.
um,
Yeah.
and and then Switzerland found me. I was headhunted for a role in Credit Suisse, and then I became the global head of research and insights over there. And we were serving all our uh, all the research and insights needs of Credit Suisse. So it was a global role. And so this is Americas, Europe, Switzerland,
Mm.
Latin America. And that was really interesting too. So because we would create reports, for example, like um, how women were how women were underbanked, or not using financial
Mm.
products, and this would impact how the bank would create new products for women in other parts of the world. Or we would also, during COVID, when people could not go to conferences, then we'd use research to start tapping uh, into our clients, and bring them into, and to serve them better. So it was quite fascinating. And then I moved to employer brand marketing, and then that was also a global team. So
Yeah.
so that was it
So
was
lots
it
of
was lots of interesting things to do.
Yeah, exciting, amazing, kind of global, I like how you said, "Then Switzerland found me, and I moved over here to this part of the world."
Yeah.
And as you look back, so retroactively now, you can look back at the chief
Mhm.
of staff role and say, "Wow, gosh, that was a catapult in my career." If if someone is in a chief of staff role today and they're saying, okay, I do want to leverage this role and I want to squeeze as much learning and experience out of it as possible, what are some things? I mean, you raised your hand for things. You said, hey, I want to learn more about this. Can I get
Mhm.
an opportunity over here? And you got that. Is there anything else that you would say to people in that position of here's how you really get the most out of that role?
I think there were three things that I did that I think I did to leverage the role. One was I really got to know the management team. I spent time with them, right? With each one. There were some that I think I got to know better than others, and that's where my next job opportunity came, right? Um,
Ah, yeah.
but I think that's because you have to get to know them, because in order to help them work with your principal, you need to get to know what's on their mind, what they need, how, what their problems are, right? So unless you understand that and understand what they need personally, um, you're not going to be able to make that connection between them and the principal, right? So you do need to invest the time, right? Um, second, um, I think you really need to start to know yourself and what you want to get out of your career, right? Because the chief of staff, it's a great role, but unless y- if you have to know, is this the career you want, or is this part of your long term plan,
Yeah.
right? And for me, early on, I knew this was not my end goal, but it was part of my plan, right? And so Jim always said, "What else do you want?" And he goes, and so I said, "Oh, I want to learn these things." And he goes, "You just learn as much as you want because you're not going." And then he said, "Also, help me find your successor because
Yes.
this is also part of your plan." So that's why I said you have to know yourself, right? So you have to craft the role for yourself, but craft it so that you will have a successor because you
And how
can't
did
make.
you
Mhm.
yeah, I mean, and how did you do that? Were you literally hiring your backfill as you were knowing that you were gonna move on, or was it just structuring the role so someone could more easily step into that role?
I think it's both, right? It's always, and also preparing your principal mentally that you're not going to be there forever.
Yes.
That's an
Yeah.
emotional. It's also an emotional preparation for him, right? Like, so that I'm moving, right? You know. So in fact, I think if I remember right, Jim found my successor because he knew
Okay.
that I'd have to go to the next role. So he was
Yeah.
also on the lookout. So if he knows that if your principal knows that you're leaving, he's also going to do what's best for you.
Yeah. Yeah, I
So
mean, it sounds
and
like you had a great boss. I mean
yeah,
I mean, you said so many important things because I think, yeah, like, don't blindside your boss and be transparent, and hopefully you have the type of relationship where you can have those conversations like, "Hey, look,
yeah,
in my overall career, I'm looking to do this, this, and this. Of course, I'm gonna do the best job possible as chief of staff, and of course, I'm gonna do right by you and the company." But it's also being clear on what you wanna get out of it, and I think good bosses know that, and they don't see that as, "Oh, no, she might be leaving." It's,
yeah,
"Look, we're lucky to have her now. We're certainly gonna stretch her and put her in different areas to learn." But, when I was managing people, if I knew what their ultimate goal was and I could put them in different positions or projects or initiatives that were for the company's benefit as well, that aligned with the company objectives, but also with their ultimate objective. Oh my goodness, that was the golden path because they
right?
loved it and the most out of them. And then I think a really important thing I wanted to highlight is you mentioned the relationships you built with the executive team. And of course, that's a huge part of being chief of staff. So in any chief of staff role, that's a critical component. But you said that the way you got your next job was through one of those connections. So I
Yeah.
just wanted to highlight it's good to do no matter what if you're chief of staff, but also building those relationships. You never know what door that's gonna open. So I think that's an important part to key in on too.
Yeah, because I think part of it too is you're building relationships authentically, right? You're not doing it with an end in mind, like, oh, I want to get a next job. I mean, I was really doing it because I needed to create success for my
Yeah.
principal. Now, I guess because we were successful, they saw my potential, right? It wasn't
Yeah.
because I was being, manipulative at all. That was not it,
Right. No, no, no.
you know,
Yeah.
because I think part of this too is if people believe that you are doing the best you can for the principal and for the company, they're gonna say, "Hey, I like what I see, and that let me create a
Mhm.
path for that person." And I think that's
Yeah.
what you have to have integrity in what you're doing, right? And I
Yeah.
think uh, that's what success should look like, right?
No, agreed.
And
And I think, building those relationships, it should be authentic and natural. And I can look back on people, I've made lifelong friends from, one or two people from each place that I've worked. And I mean, I would do anything for them. I would, of course, if they need an introduction or if they are looking for a transition in their career, of course, I'm going to help them. It's a very natural thing as a friend, and those are the kind of things you build. Where, oh, of course, as you're kind of moving on or you're taking the next step in your career, of course, I'm going to be rooting for you and helping you in any way I can. So, I think building those types of relationships is part of it too, and an important part of any role that you're in.
yeah, and I think the third thing, because I mentioned about building the relationship, and number two, it's
Mhm.
also really like knowing who you are. And I think the third thing is really also making sure that making sure that when you're there, do not lose yourself in the role,
Yeah.
right? Because it is a role, but it is not you,
Yes, correct.
right? And so why I say that is because it can feel so important,
Mhm.
right? Because it is, chief of staff. You're chief of staff. Everybody makes time for you, but that's just a role, right?
Yeah.
That's not you.
It's an important distinction, right? I mean, I think
Yeah.
with any role, especially chief of staff or high
Mm,
level senior executives, it's very easy to make that your identity,
mm,
and that can be tricky. That's a slippery slope. So I think that's
mhm.
important to say, "Hey, I hold an important role with a lot of responsibility and influence, and I take that seriously, but I know that who I am as a person is independent from
Yeah.
that. I wanna bring myself to that role, and of course, I'm part of that. It exudes out of me, but it's separate. I've experienced that myself with a few roles, and I've certainly seen it with clients and colleagues where they're so tied to their role,
Yep.
and it is who they are, and
Yep.
any shift left or right, up or down, or any threat to that is just, it makes them go into survival
Mm,
mode. So I think that is a really important distinction for people to have. I always try to say, "Look, I take the work very seriously, like, we're doing important work, and I'm dealing with people's livelihoods
mhm.
as chief of staff, but I'm trying, I know who I am, as Emily Sander, and I know who I am outside of these 4 walls, outside of
Yeah.
the office with my friends and family and different things I do in community groups and things like this, and so it helps to keep it all in perspective.
Yeah. Because I think it's important, right? Because people make time for you. They create space. All of these things. End of the day, it's because of the role. Like, if
Mm,
it were
yeah.
if it weren't me, it'd be for the next guy. So I think it's important to kind of keep that in check, and then it's a healthy way to kind of function.
Yeah, I think that's right, and I think, you know when people treat you a certain way, especially over a long period of time, it starts to seep in, right? You start to believe,
Mm,
"Oh, maybe I am that important." I was speaking with a client, and he was in a chief of staff role, and it was the first chief of staff role at the company, and part of our conversations, he wanted to make sure that that role was set up for the next person and the next person after that. So whoever filled that role after him, he wanted to create the office of chief of staff. So that position, that office, in a way that was set up well. And I thought that was just very forward thinking and very generous of him to be thinking about, of course, I want to do well. And of course, I want to carve my
Yeah,
version of chief of staff. But he was also building that role for the company ongoing.
actually,
So, Melissa, you've taken us on your career trajectory,
mhm.
and I'm curious, what are you up to now?
So now, good question. Uh, I am now a career coach. I support high achieving women who want to advance in their careers and build resilience in their daily lives, and have sustained success. Because I noticed when I was in a lot of my regional global roles, there are sadly not so many of us. And I want to have more women around me, building long longevity in their careers, no matter how they define success. So I want to help female leaders do that.
So, high achieving women, and are there certain stages in someone's career or certain pivot points that you come in and help with in particular?
That's interesting. I like right now. I'm working with a few women who are, they've just they've just gotten to the point where they have had their promotions or increased responsibilities, and it's interesting. Whenever somebody increases in capacity, that's also when other things are happening. Nothing ever happens in isolation, right? So one has just had their second child, one has just got is just about to get married, the other has just moved countries. Nothing just happens, just one monotonically or in isolation. Everything happens all at once. And I think that's why I kind of put in resilience as well, because you need to build capacity to handle things, right? And to build that, you need the tools to handle things
Mhm.
and take things in stride, because you never know when things are gonna happen for you. I'm not saying to you, but for you. So you're able to have to uh, create the capacity to handle life and what it gives you, right? So uh, I think for anyone who goes through a big transition, yeah, I think that's, and I know I've been through quite a few. As I've said, I'm moving to Singapore, Switzerland, moving from one industry to the other. I know how to do that.
Yes, you do. So if anyone is interested in that piece, what's the best place to reach out to you or find out more information about your programs?
You can reach me through LinkedIn. I'll be also my website will be up fairly soon, but right now I'm on LinkedIn or on my email, melissa.schmidiger@gmail.com.
And can you spell your last name, please?
Oh, that's a long one. Schmidiger, Schmidiger.
And we will have that in the show notes. But
All
Melissa,
right.
thank you so much for being on. It was a pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
If you enjoyed today's episode, please like, share, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts.